Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of The Legend of Hercules, the most beloved film of 2014, according to Rotten Tomatoes. But is The Legend of Hercules as amazing as everybody says it is? Well, watch the video to find out. So I had no idea that this movie even existed until I saw the trailer. I knew that there was going to be a Hercules movie starring The Rock coming out later this year, but I wasn't aware that the Hercules films was going to be the dueling movies of 2014. Now, every year there seems like there's always a set of films that have very similar premises and gimmicks, and they kind of compete against each other. Last year it was White House Down versus Olympus Has Fallen. So I guess this year it's The Legend of Hercules versus, well, whatever they're calling The Rock's Hercules movie. Probably just Hercules. And when I saw the trailer, I was happy because it looked so terrible that I had absolutely no desire to see it. Now, I've seen bad trailers before. Twilight had a pretty crappy trailer. But I just knew from that film's conception that I wasn't going to enjoy it. So, obviously, the trailer just, if it failed in any regard, it didn't change my mind. But when it came to The Legend of Hercules, it's an action fantasy with some martial arts and lots of spectacle. That is my cup of tea. I have very low standards when it comes to those kinds of films. So when the trailer is so awful that it turns me off, that's really an accomplishment. So I actually decided I wasn't going to see it. And that was a big step for me because I am a sucker for awful movies. I watched 47 Ronin knowing it was going to be terrible. I watched Getaway, which I knew was even going to be worse than 47 Ronin. So I was very proud of myself for that accomplishment. But then I started seeing the TV spots, and I noticed somebody looked pretty familiar. So I checked on the International Movie Database, and I groaned because Scott Adkins is in this movie. Now, Scott Adkins is, in my opinion, the most overlooked action star of all time. He is amazing. Now, if you know who he is, you probably know him as Jean-Claude Van Damme's second-in-command in The Expendables 2, who fights Jason Statham at the end, or X-Men Origins. He played Deadpool after he gets his mouth sewn shut. He's more of a stuntman in that movie than he is an actor, but that was, I think, one of his first roles, at least that I noticed. He probably did some stuff before then. But I know him more for his direct-to-DVD output. He's done so many good, if not great, movies, like the Undisputed sequels, even though the first one was really mediocre, that one with Wesley Snipes and Ving Rhames. The sequels are much more martial arts-centric, and they're awesome. Ninja, I heard Ninja 2, which just recently came out, was pretty awesome. Assassination Games, The Shepherd, he did a few Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, also including Universal Soldier, Day of Reckoning. Sure, he's had some missteps here and there. I thought El Gringo sucked, and even though I don't really count it, Stag Night, which is a horror film that he, for some reason, has a bit role in, even though he doesn't do any martial arts, that was an awful one too. But I knew immediately that I could not pass up this movie because it's a Scott Adkins in a film that's getting a theatrical release. I have to watch it, even though I don't really want to. And of course, there was more evidence that this was going to be a piece of shit and that the studios was really trying to keep the critics from watching this film because they obviously knew how they would react. And when it finally did get released for the critics, it had like a 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. By all accounts, this was a terrible film, but it didn't surprise me because I knew it was going to be a terrible film from the first time I saw the trailer. So I watched the movie, and is it as bad as everybody says it is? Yes. Now keep this in mind. I'm usually the guy who defends movies that are bad, but I think that fans or viewers in general are overreacting. Remember my review of Dragon Ball Evolution or The Last Airbender? I was much kinder towards those films just because they did not represent my view of atrocious. To me, atrocious is whatever the fuck Steven Seagal is making these days. But those films, they were bad, but they were just normally bad to me. That's the kind of person I am. It really takes a lot for me to say that this film is just as awful as everybody says it is. Well, The Legend of Hercules is as awful as everybody says it is, and I cannot do this movie justice. This review probably won't be a great review because there's so much I could destroy within this film that I just can't cover everything, or at least I can't cover everything in a coherent manner. So I'll try, but keep that in mind. So let's begin with, well, the action. One of the reasons I knew this movie was going to suck was Renny Harlin directed it. Now, Renny Harlin is kind of a hack as a storyteller, but he does have an eye for good visuals. And every once in a while, well, in the past, all his strengths and weaknesses would somehow work together to where they can produce a really spectacular action classic. Die Hard 2 is often regarded as an action classic, even though I think it's a little overrated. I love Cliffhanger. That is, in my opinion, one of Sylvester Stallone's best movies. The problem is outside of that, he hasn't really done anything impressive, and in some cases he's made some really, really awful movies. I have not seen Cutthroat Island, which is often regarded as one of the biggest money losers of all time, and I fear that's pretty bad, but I have seen The Covenant, which was awful, Mindhunters, which was mind-bogglingly awful. The funny thing about that film is I actually liked it the first time I saw it, but when I watched it again later on, I did not like it. But in a way, almost all of his movies have the same kind of trademarks. He's a very visual-oriented director. His pacing is usually very fast. From the beginning to the end, it's always moving as quickly as possible. And that sounds good, except usually he chooses projects that generally require the opposite. Like Mindhunters, for example, could have been a really good movie. It had a great cast, awesome premise, some really good ideas, but it needed a filmmaker who was much better at building suspense, who could pace himself in a way that draws out tension, not just to get from beginning to end as quickly as possible. You don't want to make a polished, stylish film out of something like that. And The Covenant, which is very character-oriented, is the same way. Instead of focusing on these characters, it just wants to get itself over with and provide some nice eye candy in the process. So it's like, for whatever reason, Renny Harlin isn't choosing films that play up his talents. He's choosing the wrong kinds of projects which would have probably been good under a better director. And in this case, there are some really cool moments. I liked the opening shot, for example, where it starts off underwater and it's kind of the camera's going towards the surface and more bodies are kind of falling into the water and blood's everywhere. That looked pretty cool. And every once in a while there'll be a really nice shot. But unfortunately, this movie relied a lot on CGI, and the CGI just sucks. It's even worse than 47 Ronin. In fact, the movie as a whole is even worse than 47 Ronin, but the special effects are especially a step down. And 47 Ronin showcased some really bad special effects, too. So that's a major problem, because whenever something that really requires a lot of CGI would occur, it would just take you out of the action, because it doesn't mesh well with the live action parts, and it looks so shoddy. Like when a lion pops up, I could not believe how fake that lion looked, and I complained about the bear from Wolverine, and this was far worse than that. And then, like, whenever he shows off some supernatural power, it looks so terrible. And they're trying to make this like this comic book type world, but it's very inconsistent. It's at times trying to resemble 300. In fact, when I saw the trailer for the first time, for the first few seconds, I actually thought it was the sequel to 300. But they're trying to do that same, with real strange colored lighting, backgrounds that look kind of surreal, and that could have been fine if they just was consistent about it, but at times they just change everything up to where it looked like a normal, period piece film. And that was another issue I had with 47 Ronin, is, am I watching normal Japan or fantasy Japan? Make up your mind. And this film could not make up its mind. But generally, like, in terms of the direction, the problem was mainly just the special effects sucked. So if maybe it wasn't the director's fault, if he had the right the right budget, or the people who did the special effects actually did a good job with the budget they had, because this wasn't a cheap movie. I think it cost like $70 million to produce. Maybe this movie could have been really cool. There is quite a bit of action, and there are some decent fight scenes, but unfortunately, whenever the CGI comes into play, it just totally ruins that sequence because the CGI is so abnormally bad. But also, once again, this was the wrong kind of project for Renny Harlin. It is once again trying its hardest to get itself over with. Now, I don't want you to confuse that with just fast pacing. In fact, I honestly thought this movie was very slow in certain parts. It's just trying to get from one event to the next before moving on to the next plot, because the structure is very episodic. It starts off when it introduces the characters, their situations, but we never get to know them at all, so we have no reason to care for their dilemmas and conflicts. But then Hercules has to go fight in an overseas war. Okay, well, is this going to be the place where he learns to really be a leader and stuff like that? Well, they never have any time to flesh that out, because within 10 minutes they're attacked and suddenly Hercules is a gladiator. Okay, well, is this where he's going to learn humility? Because he's going from riches to rags. Well, no, it's just a couple of fight scenes, then immediately on to the next segment of the story, where now he's starting a rebellion and at home so he could overthrow his father. And that's just like the way the plot moves. It's very erratic. There's no sense of flow. That's one thing that I've noticed with a lot of films that have like 4 different writers, which this movie did, is it's like they all have their own stories they want to tell, so the plot continuously seems to be changing, and there's just no flow to it. It just totally throws off the pacing, so I would honestly burn myself out because the film would move so quickly, be so action-oriented, but then I'd think that it's finally reaching a climax, only to remember that, wait, this is only like 30 minutes into the movie. Shit! Where they then restart that process, and it was more exhausting than entertaining. And also, this really affects the characters. I hated the characters in this movie. In some cases, they were just really inconsistent, where at times I wasn't sure if you were supposed to sympathize with the villains or not. I usually like it when villains have moments of humanity where they aren't just total monsters, because it's just more believable that way. And in this case, it seemed like these moments would give them the chance at redemption, or show that even though they've really fallen, they've become monstrous, there is still some good within them, which should make Hercules' dilemma much more powerful, because he has to pretty much kill these people. But unfortunately, it's very poorly handled here. It just seemed like the movie couldn't make up their mind as to what we should feel about them. Like when it comes to his brother, who hates Hercules, it's revealed around the halfway point that he has an inferiority complex because his mother favored Hercules, even though his father favored him. So why is he bitching? But that's introduced too late for that to become his primary character trait. So I just didn't buy that. And then when it comes to Hercules himself, I said how, when it came to him being a gladiator, this could maybe teach him humility. The problem with that is Hercules is shown to be perfect from the very, very beginning. He has no character flaws. He is humble. He is loyal to people who might not be loyal to him. There's nothing bad about that character, which it just makes him so boring. He's even more boring than Keanu Reeves' character from 47 Ronin. That guy was just an invincible, boring hero, and Hercules takes that even farther. But at the same time, I really grew to dislike him because it seemed like he was doing everything just for the sake of love. He wants to be with his girlfriend, and overthrowing an empire that has become very corrupt, that is very tyrannical. That should be his main focus, but instead he just wants to do all this to get his girlfriend back, and they never call him out on it. There's this one part that I thought was hilarious, where he's chained up and these guys, his allies, his closest friends, are about to be executed, and the main villain says, all right, these two guys are going to be executed, and just Hercules is just watching, kind of stone-faced, and he says, and your girlfriend's going to marry your brother. And then suddenly Hercules is like, what? Fuck no. And it's like, really, that's going to be the one thing that you're going to show emotion about? So and it just made, same with the love interest. She also just seemed totally uninterested in anything going around her. All the death and corruption and sorrow. All she wants is to be with Hercules, and she wants to run away with him. Once again, they're never called out on that. You never feel like they develop, that they grow from this immature mindset that the world just revolves around them. So that pissed me the fuck off. Also, while we're talking about the characters and story, I felt like this movie was ripping off a lot of other films. There are certain plot elements, or at least visual motifs, that reminded me of too many other movies, from Gladiator to Clash of the Titans to Wrath of the Titans to Ben-Hur to 300, obviously, and a few other ones. That really distracted me too, because it just was reminding me of other better films, which you never ever want to do. If I wanted to watch Gladiator, I'd be watching Gladiator, not your piece of shit movie that's trying to be Gladiator. So that was a main problem. And what else can I say? The acting was really bad too. Now, I will say that Scott Adkins as the villain was awesome. He stole every scene he's in. He looks like he's bulked up, so he has the physical presence. I've always felt that his weakness was that he just didn't stand out as much as guys like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal in terms of just their physical appearance. But here, he's got that going down. He has a lot of charisma, energy. His fight scenes are the best scenes in the entire movie, and his acting is good. He sells his dialogue really well, and he showcases his emotions in a very natural manner. While he's also over the top and insane, kind of like Leonidas from 300. But he's so good that it makes everybody else look so much terrible in comparison. The main guy, I believe his name is Kellen Lutz. Oh god, I've never seen such a cesspool of anti-charisma. Once again, he made Keanu Reeves and 47 Ronin look incredibly entertaining. This guy is just so boring. He barely emotes anything. He's a good-looking guy, and he kind of has a distinct appearance, but he can't act. And he has no personality. He's just very, very boring to watch above everything. And at times I could have sworn that his dialogue was being dubbed over, because it wasn't like it ever looked like he was dubbed, but at times there'd be so little emotion in his line delivery that it just didn't feel right. Like, there's this one part at the end where he ducks down so you can't really see his mouth, and he says something, but it just sounded dubbed. It didn't sound like it'd come directly from his mouth. And there was a lot of moments where they could have been making a lot of mistakes. I noticed this one part where a character gets stabbed by a spear, and then for no reason they kind of jump around and flip, as if the person was supposed to lift them up on the spear and throw them away, but they missed their cue or something. And then another part where a weapon bends in a real awkward manner, because it was obviously probably plastic. There were a lot of little mistakes like that. But above everything, I thought the story sucked, the action sucked, the main character really, really sucked. The supporting cast is generally pretty bad too. I did like the guy who, I believe he's in Spartacus, that TV show. He plays Hercules' sidekick. He was a pretty good actor, but the main girl, man, talk about overselling every emotion. All of her more lovey scenes with Hercules were just kind of corny and laughable, because she's just, I don't know, her facial expressions are just so over the top. And the dialogue is really bad too. They're trying to sound like all old-fashioned and authentic, even though it really wasn't authentic. They start using phrases that weren't invented until recently. That was really distracting too. But the dialogue is really bad. So I guess, to be fair to the actors, they couldn't work with that very much. But I don't know, that's really all I have to say. This movie blew. Do not watch it. Do not watch it at all. If this review wasn't coherent enough for you, although I think it turned out better than I expected, I did do a written review, so you could check that out. I'll leave a link in the description. Also, I didn't do a whole lot of written reviews since Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, last year. But I did do my top 10 most read reviews, if you care for that kind of thing. My worst movies of 2013. And 2013 was a really shitty year, and if this was released in 2013, it would be really high up on the list. Really high up on the list. Getaway high up on the list. This might be a tad bit better than Getaway just because of Scott Adkins, but not by much. And I also did my favorite films of 2013. So please check those out. Hopefully, I didn't make as many mistakes as I was concerned about. I feel like I pronounced a few words awkwardly and got some of my numbers wrong. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Do not watch this movie. Please, God, do not watch this movie. Tomorrow I should release my vlog of Lone Survivor. So that's a much, much better the movie than this is. And that doesn't even mean it's good. But The Legend of Hercules really set the bar really low. Not a good sign for this year. This was even worse than Texas Chainsaw 3D. Okay, bye.